Kuzmic. You're in Romania at the Theological Pentecostal College, where you've had a series of lectures and you have taken part at the graduation ceremony of the 2011 generation of students. I thought it good to have you for an interview, and because I took part at the, I listened to the lectures yesterday, I'd like to start by asking you to tell me and all those who will watch or read the interview something about your family and your recollections of Pentecostalism during your youth. You mentioned your father yesterday, and I was very touched by that brief moment in which you spoke about him and about the atmosphere, the social atmosphere of communism in Yugoslavia afterwards. So could you please share some information, especially that many young persons like me do not know much about these issues?
Well, I was born in Slovenia, in the eastern part, the most northeastern corner of former Yugoslavia, 2 kilometers from the Austrian border and 6 kilometers from the Hungarian border. My father, Leopold Kuzmic, was a nominal Lutheran. Our folks were Lutherans for many generations, including pastors, Lutheran pastors in our family. By the time I was born, my father was converted. At the age of 35, his age of 35, which was in the year of 1937-38, he wanted to lead a kind of a protest, almost rebellion against a visiting Pentecostal preacher who was doing, you could say, open-air evangelism, but in the backyard of a newly converted family. And my father was a very proud Lutheran, although very ignorant of Lutheran faith. So he was baptized Lutheran as a baby. And he was a leader in the community, so he took a group of strong men and said, I will lead you, and I will listen very carefully. When a man says something wrong, I'll shout liar, and then we'll throw stones and we'll drive them out, because they were sure that this was a sect, dangerous sect coming. And up in that part of Slovenia, you were either Lutheran or Catholic.
No Baptists at the time?
No other Protestant group of any kind. Well, my father listened so carefully that he concluded that the man was somehow talking about him. He was touched by the Holy Spirit. He was truly converted, freed from alcohol. He loved to drink. And a New Testament was pushed into his hands, and he knew that that was translated by one of our forefathers, Stefan Kuzmic, 200 plus years earlier. And he started witnessing to his friends. It's a very interesting story, because he had only 3 years of elementary education, which was interrupted by the First World War. Men had to go to war, there were no women teachers, and he really had to start to read again. But he would give his testimony, Jesus changed my life. And since he was known as a community leader, he would say, Jesus changed my life, and here it's the story about him. And he had some 40, 50 converts very quickly, and he would take them to the closest village where there was a beginning already, a nucleus of a Pentecostal congregation, the first Pentecostal congregation in Slovenia. So the Pentecostalism came there later than some other parts.
So, do you know the name of that pioneer who brought Pentecostalism and converted?
Yes, Banfi family. He was Hungarian, she was Slovenian from that area. They returned from America, where they became Pentecostal in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they had a strong calling to return to their home area to evangelize.
Was Pentecostalism at that time marked by or specific to a certain social class, like similar to what it was in the United States? Because initially Pentecostalism was not in the mainstream. It was, and people were looking down on it as and considering it the denomination of the working class, or
no, because it began in the more rural areas, and really the first converts, including my father and a man named Mr. Joseph Novak, who became a Christian out of curiosity, and he was a returnee from America earlier. These were leaders. They were recognized as natural community, respected people. So it didn't have that, didn't carry that stigma. It did later, or actually already earlier, in some other parts of former Yugoslavia, where some very poor people became Pentecostals. And yet the very beginnings were among Germans. At the very beginning of the 20th century, you had in a village called Beška, B-E-S, I guess you'd say that if you speak English, B-E-S-H-K-A, Beška in Vojvodina, north of Belgrade, a little south of Novi Sad. You had an outbreak among Lutheran pietists, where you had already in 1906 first recorded baptism with the Holy Spirit, glossolalia, as a sign among Lutheran pietists who were really devoted, God-fearing, hungry for more. Pietists were a Lutheran movement, as the word itself seems to suggest, emphasizing piety.
were they related to the Herrnhut movement?
I am not sure that they were related to Herrnhuter movement itself, but they were influenced by German. They were part of the German minority, the so-called Volksdeutscher. So they were part of the pietistic influence, mostly from the Württemberg area of southern Germany.
How do you remember communism? And during your youth, you briefly mentioned yesterday that there were challenges for the faith and intellectual challenges to which your father could not at that time answer adequately. And so
you see, my father was in the year 1944. He became a lay preacher. He built a church in our own village of Nuskova, N-U-S-K-O-V-A. And several of the preachers were just collected by Germans, taken into German captivity, fortunately not into concentration camps, but into forced labor to replace German workers who were fighting on the Eastern Front. And so he spent, I think, about 18 months, a year and a half, in German captivity. Then the Allies came. We used to celebrate the D-Day in our family. And they returned home. And I was born a year later. I was born in June 1946. And I'm number 4. And then I had a brother a year and a half later. I had a brother who was born a year and a half later, and I'm number 4. And my youngest brother, Karel, is number 5 in a family of 5. The oldest was born 1928, second one 1934. So there was this serious joke in our family that had my parents not converted, I would be non-existent. But when he returned, the communists were already in power, because Tito, Marshal Tito, with a very small party, Communist Party, organized a large popular liberation war against the occupied German forces, and was rather successful, with some help from abroad, because Churchill started supporting him after a few years, and so on. And so by the time my father returned, communists were in power, and they were the worst. And Yugoslav communism started out like in other Soviet satellites, very much subservient, obedient to Stalin. So Yugoslavia was a Soviet satellite state. until Tito said "niet" to Stalin, and then slowly tried to move away from Soviet policies. But they were still around for quite a while. So when I started school, there was still no Sunday school permitted, no youth work, no literature, with all of the very strict restrictions. All of that came much later as Tito was incrementally liberalizing, as he was opening the border, allowing more private property, and all of that was accompanied, with, of course, with a little bit more religious freedom. Also, although a number of our pastors were in prisons, my mentor, Ludwig Uhlen, was in prison 3.5 years. My father was in prison, but not for long terms of time, but he was beaten up, taken away. I remember when the church was sealed, when communist militia broke into our home. I was 6 years old. That was the last wave of physical persecution. Restrictions remained, but physical persecution, that was the last wave, and they took them away, and they would beat them up. And I still get vivid images in my head of militia breaking into our home with bayonets on their rifles, and looking everywhere, looking for Bibles, really, for literature, and then taking him away and ransacking the church and sealing the doors and the windows and so on. And then later he would tell us the story, not while we were still small, and how they would take him into because he was under strict orders to appear in a militia station, quite a walk distance away, every Sunday morning 10 o'clock, to make sure that he was not preaching somewhere in a private home or in a forest that they used to do. And they would take him into a small room, no windows, and two militiamen would literally, brutally play ball with him. One would hit him, and many of those hits in his head, like in unprotected boxing, I guess, and screaming, "There is no God, you stupid believing, we are gods here, we will kill you if you don't give up your faith," and things like that. But I do remember that he saw that as a privilege, and he was grateful. He would say something like, "What a joy to suffer with my Lord, sometimes for my Lord, who died for me on the cross." That was how he saw his physical torture and suffering.
Did he live to see communism falling?
He died 1 year before 89. He died in 88.
What was the atmosphere at that time?
But in Yugoslavia we had freedom. We really, from the mid-60s on.
Middle of the 60s?
Yes. You see, in 1967 I was given a passport. Anybody could get a passport, except that young men, like in my case, had to serve the military. Military was obligatory.
1 year?
Year and a half. My oldest brother served 3 years. Then they were reducing it slowly. But if you served the military, you could get a passport, and you could travel anywhere. And Tito was a genius in many ways. He was a dictator, but in some ways you could say a benevolent dictator, because a very courageous leader. He to say "niet" to fight the Germans, the overwhelming army. There are movies made. In one, Richard Burton plays Tito, quite famous, and so on. So that was quite an epochal kind of liberation war. Then he, in '56, he called Nehru, and Nehru of India, and Nasser of Egypt, and a few others to Belgrade, and they founded the non-aligned movement. It became a very powerful movement, situated as, that's why they're called non-aligned, is between two blocks, and critical of the arms race and the nuclear threat and all of those things that marked the late 50s and 60s and 70s, well, all the way until the wall came down, although there was a detente in the meantime. But anyhow, so we had more freedom. My brother, my second brother, Joseph, He left the country legally. When he was a young man, in his mid-20s, he couldn't get a passport. And many were fleeing. And he fled for Germany, through the forests. I remember one Sunday morning, we had, as you have here, we would have the first half an hour of prayer on our knees. And I remember one Sunday morning, people were whispering because they said, Joseph is not here, and Ivan is not here, and Drago is gone. And they were sure that it was that night that a number of young men fled the border, fled across into Austria. A few years later, Romanians fled across, or swam across Danube, and to Yugoslavia, as Yugoslavia was now an open way to the west.
So communism was not really that repressive, or the persecution against the church was not as tough as in Romania or Soviet Union.
Not as long.
Not as long.
Not as long. But there was a considerable persecution in the early years of communist rule.
Are there martyrs?
Not among Pentecostals. There are Catholic clergy that have been killed. But that's very disputed now. Were they killed because of their religion or because they were nationalists who were supportive of the pro-Nazi Croatian puppet state that was set up during the Second World War. And there's a big dispute, for example, in Croatia right now still, because the Catholic Church is well, actually, the cardinal was beatified, Tito imprisoned, and so on. Very famous court case against the Archbishop, the President of the Bishops' Conference of Yugoslavia, the Archbishop of Zagreb, Stepinac. So they would consider them martyrs. Among them were students of theology. But then, of course, the other side is saying, wait a minute, but they had arms. They were shooting at the partisani, at the Titos. So it became a kind of an ideological struggle, because they saw communism as it was, as an anti-Christian force that would forcefully atheist the nation once if they came to power. So there was some of that resistance.
Did you ever have the feeling that communism somehow shaped the way the church, the Pentecostal church or other churches, their ethos or way of organizing, or impose certain things into the confession or statement or way they were organized? I'm asking this because in a recent book published by a Romanian Pentecostal pastor, Redeeming the Memory, the author makes a strong case that the communists united the Pentecostal movements, the three Pentecostal movements. They imposed unification in order to control them better and actually managed to introduce a certain, let's call it, liturgy, although a certain order of worship and many other things. Did you ever get that feeling?
Not to that extent that I've seen and heard in Romania. I've traveled considerably in Eastern Europe, and I have gotten to know some Pentecostal and Baptist pioneers even in Soviet Union and Bulgaria, for example, and so on, and people who spent years in prison. Not to the same degree. As you know, in some of the communist nations, Pentecostals were even forced into union with other Protestants, with the evangelicals. That was true in the Soviet Union, with the All Union Council, Evangelical Christians and Baptists, which was in Baptists, and Mennonites, and Pentecostals, and so on. You had it even in Poland. Not in Yugoslavia, Pentecostals were more persecuted, one could say, by the traditional churches before communists took over, more physically persecuted. There were attacks.
And that was the case in Romania too. The Orthodox Church was one of the strongest persecutors, together with the gendarmes or police forces.
The national, all traditional national churches wanted monopoly on religion in the country. So any of these groups as a kind of a foreign intruders and a threat to culture and identity and so on. There was a time when Pentecostals were outlawed, or could not be registered. For example, Pentecostals in Slovenia were then embraced by, when that part of Slovenia was under Hungary, were embraced by a Hungarian Brethren leader who was a professor of medicine at the university in Budapest. And that has kind of quieted the phenomenon, you know, that it did introduce the more orderly service, subdued emotional manifestations, and no public manifestations of the charismata by which Pentecostals are generally known. But that, on the other hand, had something positive because they were taught to study the scriptures, to search the scriptures, and learn that you preach the scriptures, not your emotions and your experiences. If I may move a little bit south in Croatia, where I have lived longest and where I am in ministry now, and in Serbia, for example, you had a number of Pentecostals at the time, even early 30s, before my father was converted, who went to Bible school in Danzig.
We had some Romanians too.
Yeah, Danzig.
Danzig.
Yes, and some Bulgarians and others. That was quite a famous Pentecostal Bible school. They had even people like Donald G. from UK, United England, come to teach in intensive long courses. I understand even Lady Petrus spoke there, some Americans from the assemblies and so on. So that helped also in terms of solidifying some teaching and a greater sense of identity or a Pentecostal family, so that they could not stay small, closed in isolated sectarian groups.
Since I mentioned this book, Redeeming the Memory, I should point out that the book reveals that some of the pastors and actually the leaders, presidents, the first president and the next, were collaborators of the Securitate, the former secret service, secret police. And that was quite a shock. It created naturally controversy. Did you have, and it made us wonder what should be done in connection with this subject, this theme, namely that of pastors collaborating with the system and sometimes supplying information that would make other people suffer or that would be harmful for other members of the church. What was happening in Yugoslavia or in countries? What do you know of what is happening in other countries? Because we are trying now to wrestle with these facts, and we still do not have the full picture. And
that has been true to some extent, although less documented, in Bulgaria. We know of cases in former Soviet Union, and there's some controversy, except that those people are still not in the same movement, because the younger, more progressive generation just broke away or started their own thing, and because they were part of the so-called non-registered church, underground church sometimes called, those that would not compromise. And those that were willing to make some compromises, find some modus vivendi to keep their building or services or have passports to travel to the mountain or not baptize children, under the age of 18 or limit some other activities. Those were the officially recognized leaders. We really don't have a record. I'm not saying that something doesn't exist. Some there is secret archives. Nobody has done thorough research because there was no obvious evidence that there were traitors of that kind. There were people that came under suspicion when militia started, beating up Christians and so on, that supposedly made compromises so that they would not suffer physically or not end up in prison, be taken away from their family. And to what extent they reported on those others, I don't know of archival evidence.
But are there archives which could be studied or in which people could do research? Do they keep or are they open for the scholars?
Because there was so much, Yugoslavia is such a mix-up and complex interethnic community, and ethnicity and religion, of course, go very often hand in hand. So the focus is on the other issues. It's ethnicity, was it Serbs against Croats, was it Bosniak against, and so on. And less focus on these religious minorities, which were not a political force. But because they were not political force, they were not a threat to the system.
And not even in the Orthodox or Catholic.
There you do
clergy,
get some.
clergy.
Oh yes, there you do get some. Of course, again, not as bad as Soviet Union. I think was the worst because the communist apparatchiks who were in charge of security, specialists for religious communities, they were not only controlling the leaders and election of leaders, they were even planting seminarians who then they helped as they were under their supervision.
On the hierarchy.
Yes, it's only an accusation that even by their own clergy, some of them have been defrocked. That even as high, the highest figure like Patriarch Alexis II, who died a couple of years ago, was planted by the party and was a collaborator, things like that.
And what should we do? I mean, the Pentecostal movement has shied away from opening its past or doing some research. This book has forced the issue into the public arena of many Pentecostalism, and actually the echoes are also heard on abroad in the United States and also in Europe. But that is creating, of course, turmoil. People who feel that the leaders are now disparaged. The former leaders are disparaged. What would be your advice for our generation, which has little experience under communism and who yet wants to find out what has happened and possibly learn something? Although I wouldn't.
That is not an easy chapter or chapters of history to deal with. I don't see how you go about redeeming the history if there is no cleansing of memory. Cleansing in the sense that it be brought out into the open, that people, if they're still alive, repent. You have maybe something could be learned, although that's in a larger, like Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. I observed that a little bit and read about it, and something like that, where people can come out. Repentance is precondition for the cleansing of a sinful past, sinful memory, whether it's on a personal level, family, local community, whatever. The difficulty is that so many of those people are dead. And yet, as Christians, you cannot hide the past. You cannot lie about the past. You cannot proclaim that somebody was a saint when that person may be responsible that somebody else was persecuted and suffered. On the other hand, revenge is not a Christian option either. you don't vindicate, you don't practice revenge, but psychologically, it's a very difficult subject to deal with, because I was just asked this morning by somebody about two of the top leaders in this country, Bokyan and Sandro. I've known them 40 plus years because they travel the world. And everybody, not everybody, but many in the West were suspicious that how could they get passports and travel so easy. And then when they would speak publicly, you would never hear one critical comment about their country. Soviet leaders, I was a speaker and theological advisor to two General Assemblies of the World Council of Churches. And I remember 1983 in Vancouver, there were some 40 Soviet delegates from Soviet Union. Majority were Orthodox, but it was 5 or 6 Baptists, because of the Baptist Union, the All Union Council was a member of the World Council of Churches. And they would be gathered in the evening, and there was a security, as a man, secret service, well-educated expert, and they would have briefings, debriefing and preparing for the next day. And, because the World Council of Churches platforms are much more politicized and so on than some of our evangelical events, and they would be voting on resolutions that condemn United States of America or Westerners. And they would sing a few praises for the Soviet outstanding exemplary peace policy in the world and things like that. And yet I got to know some of those people. It's a very interesting. Or the two leaders from this country that you mentioned, that I mentioned. I remember a leader of the Pentecostal movement in Austria who said, but people are suspicious of them. In my house for several days, and every morning at 4:30 or 5, I could hear prayer, real supplication and prayer from their room. They must be spiritual men. Well, they were probably both. And so we cannot take a black and white. For some people, some leaders, Alexei Vichkov, the Baptist leader in Moscow, I had open conversation with him. When Perestroika came glasnost, I did quite a bit of teaching in Moscow, and he continued his ministry. He would not be in the top leadership. He worked with a Korean group, became a head of a Bible school, and so on. And I concluded that this man had diplomatic skills, and that he was wise in some areas. He was slowly extending horizons of freedom and getting more, like they had this Bratsky Vestnik, Fraternal Messenger magazine, and he was able to keep it alive, and not only that, increase the volume from 1,000 to 3,000 and to 5,000 and so on. So it was give and take. The problem is if we have evidence where the people did it for money, not for the benefit of the church, that is morally much more damning. Damning? Yeah. You know what I mean? And or if they betrayed somebody else who then had to leave their wife and kids at home and be taken in prison. That is different category. So I think there are degrees of betrayal and degrees of
guilt and
moral compromise. So compromise maybe is not always betrayal, it may be wisdom to gain certain advantage for the cause of Christ.
You spoke of 3 possible ways to deal with communism, one being very confrontational, one being an isolation and a retreat inside the community, which leads to the creation of some religious ghettos, and one would be perhaps accommodation or compromise. What do you think would have been appropriate for, in the case of communism? which do you feel would be the one which would permit the church to exist and claim a right to exist without making so many compromises that its existence in such a compromised form would be questionable? Like we have in, I think, in former in Soviet Russia, this stance of firm resistance, which leads to imprisonment and all to destruction of a lot of churches. And then we have, after 40, we have this accommodation, and which leads to what we see now in Russia, namely that the state and the church are very tightly woven together, if my analysis or my perception is correct. So between these two extremes, what would the church be called to do in similar circumstances?
The circumstances differ from country to country and from time to time. There were waves of massive persecution, and there were waves of kind of relaxing policies. So it depends on what was the sometimes it even depends on the international political climate, or when there was some political distance in the country, assuming more courage to speak out, even the churches, then it was a general suppressive policy. So it really would depend on the circumstances, and I would say it would depend on the strength of on the numbers, on the power, social power of the movement, of the Christian movement, and of course on the wisdom and courage, the right mix of wisdom and courage of the leaders. Wherever communist parties succeeded in kind of imposing mediocre, not well educated, not articulate leaders, they didn't need to worry much, because they would just order the person, the president or whatever, remove that pastor. It was like it happened in this country when the Reformed bishop ordered Laszlo Tekes, was ordered by the government to remove Laszlo Tekes from his church in Timisoara, which then eventually led to the massive protest and to the revolution. Not that that caused the revolution, but it was a spark, definitely, that ignited the freedom cause in Timisoara, that led to the demise of Ceausescu's regime, ultimately. So it all depended where and who and how many. But what I have observed in certain cases is that a lot depended on how authentic the local Christian community was. If they had a good witness among their neighbors. For example, my father was highly respected, and so their neighbors who were not Pentecostals, who were not committed Christian of any kind, they were the protective safety network, saying these are good people. They are not political dissidents. They are honest. They can always be trusted, and so on. A different story among the intellectuals, who are more widely educated in the cities, say in the universities, where those people usually lost their jobs as a wave of persecution would come. And of course the selection policy for university training was such that you could not do social studies or any other area that, except for engineering or some of those less influential areas. By the nature of the subject, didn't deal with the issues of meaning and purpose and philosophy of life and so on. So I'm not a threat as a professional. But it's very interesting, Pentecostalism as a rediscovery of the charismata was very often lacking in prophetic leadership. Prophetic in the full sense of the word, where you have an insight and you understand the times and you have the courage to speak the truth to power.
with a critical edge,
Yes, yes.
cutting at the heart of
Yeah.
the issues.
And when in some of these countries there were strong prophetic younger voices, they were silenced, excommunicated or whatever. And very interesting, some of them became even communist leaders out of disillusionment with, as of course we know from history, if we even, well, some Pentecostalism was already around, but you have the case of Georgi Dimitrov in Bulgaria, who later became the general secretary of the Second Internationale, I think. Georgi Dimitrov was raised by a very godly congregational family, godly mother. She even took the Bible to him when he was in prison in Univ or somewhere. But he gave up on his faith, and that's recorded, because it didn't have social relevance. It was kind of withdrawal.
Is he the one arrested in connection with the Reichstag fire? Because there was a Bulgarian who later became the
I
chief of
am
the
not
Communist
sure
Party.
that
Was it
my prior memory can confirm that with certainty, but I think there's
33,
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
sure.
I think so.
Mhm.
I think so. But you even had it earlier, in the very beginning of these revolutionary ideas. Friedrich Engels, closest collaborator and financier of Marx's research and writing. Friedrich Engels, unlike Marx, grew up in a wonderful Christian. I talked about pieties.
Mhm.
Lutheran home. He prayed and read his Bible at, I think, almost till 17. And then correspondences, I think, was between him and his friend, where he says, doesn't make sense any longer. Kneel down or pray. And it was not only intellectual, challenging, the kind of Enlightenment, rationalistic worldview, challenging Christian faith as superstition. It was more. It was also that faith did not relate or did not provide an answer or examples of social engagement, progressive thought, fighting injustice, or child labor, for example. Keep in mind that communist ideas were born not in Soviet Union, but in Western nations where industrial revolution has already divided, created the poorer proletarian exploited working class.
In Victorian England.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I'm simplifying it now a little bit as you look at the 19th century. We look at secularization today. I recently talked with a group of Catholic bishops and theologians, and I said, look, don't just throw stones of condemnation at the forces of secularization. We need to ask, where did Christianity fail? It's like in Latin America, and why Pentecostalism exploded. And it was a social force also. They say that liberation theology wrote about the poor, and the poor opted for Pentecostal movement because it gave them space to be kind of liberated internally and experience this social lift, redemptive lift. It became a social lift. The church lost in the 19th century both the working class and the intelligentsia, the academy. So what do you have? You have the social revolt because of the exploited working classes are waiting for a leader. And you have this brilliant young man, most cases men, although there was who provided intellectual framework for understanding their socio-political plight and situation, but also leadership, revolution. So, those who say that Marxism is a Christian heresy are not too far from truth. Yeah.
Speaking of the religious leaders from Romania, whom you have known Wurmbrand also.
I knew Richard Wurmbrand. I was with
What are your recollections?
well, I was a
He
student.
was voted as one of the in top 10 most famous Romanians, and at some point he was very up.
I'm actually glad to hear that. I know Richard and his wife Sabina. I don't know where their son is, who continued their mission. I wrote about Richard Wurmbrand. When I was a student in Germany, that was the time he was bought by Norwegian Lutherans from out of Romanian prison. So I heard him speak, and in one case I was asked to give a testimony on the platform in which he spoke, but that was not in Germany, although I was still a student. That was in England, in A14, I think it was. And I'll never forget how he stood up and pulled up his shirt. And you could see the scars. You could see the scars. I was very impressed with his eloquence. And the fact that here is a Lutheran who is actually ethnic Jew, who has this living, experiential faith that we Pentecostals recognize quickly. Because he would share how in the dungeon, I think with his feet in cold water, whatever, he would dance and sing to the Lord. It was like charismatic experiences. I have, of course, I've not looked at his whole life. Of course, I was a little worried when he tried to connect Marxism with occultism. I'm not.
Marx and Satan.
Yeah,
that
Satan.
book which
Yeah.
made some.
There may have been a little bit ideologically motivated speculation that led to conclusions based on scarce evidence. I don't know. But for the rest, his Torture for Christ, of course, is a classic, definitely. And some of his published sermons. And from what I've heard him later again a couple of times. And my friend Joseph told me that he's been influenced. He under communism, he told me, for him the greatest example of a genuine Christian leader was Richard Wurmbrand. And I think that Richard Wurmbrand made him think also about Christian faith.
Now, passing from one issue, from communism, to another one, which is of more recent dates, how would you summarize, especially for Romanian readers, the war in Yugoslavia, the recent war with the ethnic cleansings and what happened? The history of the Balkans is so complicated that it's hard to comprehend. What has happened in the 90s, in the early 90s? How did Yugoslavia break? If you can summarize, it's a difficult problem.
Well, it's a complex history. Winston Churchill used to quip that Balkans produces more history than it's able to consume. Yugoslavia is a compound word. Yug means south, so it's a land of South Slavic peoples. They were not put together into one nation state until Versailles Conference. When Ottomans had to withdraw, go south and leave territory they occupied, and Austro-Hungarians had to give up large areas that they controlled. And so you had this new, first as a monarchy, of course, it was a kingdom of Croats, Serbs, Croats, Slovenes with a Serbian monarch. That's already problematic. But it's created where this civilizational cliff runs, because you have orthodoxy east of Danube and then further south, and you have Catholicism in Western, and then you have something like 4.5 million Muslims, which is a remnant of the Turkish occupation, although they were not Turks, they were Bosniaks or Albanians in Kosovo. So you had this amazing ethnic and religious mix, as well as two different major religion, Christian confessions, as well as alphabets and so on. Somebody called Yugoslavia the India of Europe. What happened following '89, when this great wave of democracy came and swept away the Berlin Wall and opened up the Soviet Union, and of course Ceausescu was gone by Christmas '89 and so on. Now the most open, the most progressive of the socialist countries, which didn't have any Warsaw Pact forces, was not a member of the Soviet bloc, but a leader in the non-aligned movement. You know, 89? Yes, when the non-aligned had their global summit or 88. I have to check my recent history. I'm better in ancient history than recent history. When they had their global summit on non-aligned in Sava Center in Belgrade, some of us were invited as religious leaders. I was representing the Protestants. I saw with my own eyes when Libyan Gaddafi rode in on a camel, and then he wanted these girls, beautiful young officers that were accompanying, to go with him into the plenary hall. We were on the balcony as guests, and the security would not let them in, and they tackled. It was a physical fight, which at that time was made the global news. But anyhow, that's not important. What is important to say at this point is, suddenly this most progressive, most open country needed elections. So what they do, they have elections in each of the 6 republics and on the 2 autonomous regions. And nationalist parties win everywhere except Belgrade and the little Montenegro, which was a puppet ally of Belgrade, Serbia. And now you have these communist leaders remain in power without changing, as they did a little later. And they were trying to save the old Socialist Federation. And because Yugoslavia had the 4th or 5th strongest army on the continent of Europe, because Tito didn't have problems getting arms to keep the Soviets away from the Adriatic, which would give them open, easy access to the Mediterranean, the most important geostrategic basin militarily speaking. So you had this enormous army. The old generals were still Soviet trained. And Milosevic, I remember when he held a speech celebrating the 600th anniversary of the Kosovo battle, about 1 million people there, televised everywhere. And he makes a statement, I think I can literally translate back into English, something like that. This constitutional crisis of Yugoslavia, because now you have 2 republics that are still with Communist Party leadership, and you have the others where they've elected national parties, non-anti-communist leadership. They want economic reforms. He still wants command the economy, central command the economy. Anyhow, he's in his famous speech, he says, "We will resolve this crisis by constitutional or extra-constitutional means." Then he says, "We will resolve it by peaceful or other means." Well, extra-constitutional or other means means breaking the law. Peaceful or other means, that's right. So I wrote next morning, I was already writing for a secular weekly, and I said, we heard the words of war. It's bellicose rhetoric. Wars begin with words. Somebody should stop the potential killer, because his hand is in the air before he slaps and innocent people suffer. Unfortunately, it happened. I lost some of my Serbian students who rebelled against me because I was, rector of the school, and 5-6 years later they apologized. He asked for forgiveness, but at that time they thought I was, they call you a prophet, but with much delay.
And after much suffering.
Yeah. But anyhow, their first idea was save the Socialist Federation. When they saw that was impossible, because there was a proposal to create a kind of a confederacy, to create our autonomy. Well, he wouldn't budge. He was not ready. In a different context earlier, he said compromise could be wisdom. Well, he didn't have wisdom to compromise. And he, when that was not possible to save the Socialist Federation, he then began the war, and the slogan became Greater Serbia. Wherever there are Serbs, it's Serbia. So if you have 20% of population of Croatia Serbian, arm them. you have 30% or more population of Bosnia Serbs, arm them. And then the federal Serb-controlled army comes in to protect these guys who started shooting at other nationals, the majorities, and so you get the tragedy, one after another. So it later, the perception was created was ethno-religious warfare because the Croats were Catholics and Serbs were, Orthodox and Bosniaks were Muslims, and you had some clergy bless the weapons and so on. But it was really, it started out as ideological, then it turned into territorial, and then, as it always happens in crisis, both ethnicity and religiosity were manipulated by political leaders who have sick ambitions to enlarge their territory regardless of human cost.
And you've lived through it, and you became a refugee from...
Well, my city, the city of Osijek, we had to evacuate the seminary also, was hit with
When was that?
that started in the summer of 91. And we were not able to return for a whole school year.
Was the city devastated by...
Every third house was destroyed or hit. A lot of damage, some 1,500 people died, many wounded. Tragic. Although the greatest suffering was, was in Bosnia.
What would be the challenges the biggest challenges for Europe now, and also for Christianity in Europe, in your opinion? Where do you think, or the factors which could lead to a crisis or challenges, not only in terms of what could be done, but also in terms of what threatens Europe or Christianity in Europe?
Christianity since Constantine, and in 2 years we'll have an anniversary, shaped Europe in a very significant way. And Christendom, as you know, was a very powerful concept, but not totally dissimilar from some of the Islamic concepts of church, religion, state, Sharia law, Christian civilization. So we have the remnants of the culture Christianity. Europe was Christianized, but Europe was really never evangelized. Some segments were. Syrian Methodists were evangelizers in some ways. But generally speaking, one could say it was an imposition of Christendom more by force than by willing response of the people to the good news of Jesus Christ. No wonder the psychologist Jung, Carl Gustav Jung, said, and he was son of a Reformed pastor of Switzerland, and that European Christianity is like a cathedral built on the ruins of a pagan temple. So when you had some revivals, you had the Wesleyan revival, you had the Welsh revival, you had the Pietist revivals, Pentecostal revival was one in the series, except that it was marked by the fact that it was the beginning of a new kind of free church, Freikirchen, church, with a mostly congregational model of church government. So that experiential Christianity that emphasizes the individual dependence and dedication to Christ and holy living, morality and so on. But these are very small. When you look at the whole population, except for some of the revivals in Britain and partially Pietism in southern Germany, which really changed communities and emptied bars and changed the moral life. Other revivals didn't make any large impact on culture and society. Maybe in Norway, but that's a different story now. Europe today is a prey of the forces of secularization. it's not all bad. I am critical of secularism imposed, of what Ratzinger calls dictatorship of relativism.
Would you name France as the example of?
Well, France is a good example. It was the French Revolution. Again, I think my Catholic friends, and debating with them, blaming how much bad they did. Well, what did they respond to? You had the abuse of clerical power and so on. France is an example, but you see, yes.
But you did give a model of terror, which was later used by the communists. So the
True.
reign of terror.
True, but it was a terror against state terror. Now that's the whole question. When can revolution be justified? Because it started with some ideas, ideals, that are noble, that are liberating. The secular. So I will be critical of secularism, but secularization as a methodological principle could be interpreted as liberation from captivity to the religious type of collectivism that does not really free human consciences to choose. Even Protestantism fell prey to these because of the political arrangements, and it was, the religion of the prince is the religion of the people. The Augsburg peace did, but I think Pentecostalism, of course, although now there are new forces, independent churches, new waves of spirit revival and charismatics and so on. So I don't know whether the classical Pentecostalism is able to read the signs of the time and adjust properly to still be a significant force. Maybe in this country because of its sheer numbers, although it seems to me that the younger and better trained forces and intellectuals need to be mobilized more, so it doesn't come across as a rural movement or a movement led by people who don't have a national or global or European vision.
I was going to ask you, what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of Pentecostalism, and you have already begun to touch on these issues. Could you perhaps, this would be the last question.
Yeah. Well, strengths are obviously personalized experience, Christianity, counting with God, theology of the cross, an emphasis on humility and morality and so on, but the social dimension is weak, it seems to me. For example, I mentioned morality. Morality, when you reduce moral rules to rules of what you don't do, and those are usually the externals that really don't change too much in terms of a life of a community and so on, and then they are imposed by a certain disciplinarian, leadership of a local congregation. It's an easy way to drive out the younger generation, especially if you don't have educated and culturally sensitive leadership. I think part of the problem is that we don't have a social ethics and that there has been quite a bit of anti-educational attitude, anti-intellectualism, let me put it this way.
Maybe this has to do with eschatology and that...
eschatology is a big problem. Escapist eschatologists, I can give you some of my writings that are very critical of dispensational theology, what we did, and this.
So that would be a weakness.
Yeah, I think it is a weakness because what I tried to say here the other night when you translated for me, our problem is that we have dehistoricized eschatology and we've de-eschatologized history, and we are acting like what will happen at the end is more important than what happened with Jesus' resurrection. Hey, that middle point has determined the end point. That's why this speculation and neurotic preoccupation with eschatology, which is not eschatology, it's not politicism, is mistaken. It takes too much energy and it feeds into the end-time industry.
And Left Behind series.
And Left Behind has left much out. It needs to be central. Yeah. But still, there's still a force. Right? And that's why educational institutions like this are so important to provide solid, but also expand minds to think in contemporary terms, and be, I like to think of transformation as a paradigm describing what Christian church is all about. And it's not just personal transformation, it's not just my sins will be washed away by the blood of Jesus and I'll make it to heaven. It is much more. And that's why I always emphasize the metaphors of Jesus, the salt, the light of the world, and what's the English expression, the yeast, that leavens and so the church in a country like Romania, and I've observed it in the congregations where we were and the pastors yesterday, has an enormous potential to be a major player in this society. I think the Pentecostal movement in this country needs a university where people could study law, people could study social science, political science, culture, the use of media, and so on. I am a theological educator. I see the importance of this, very important. But the pulpit is not the only place where Christian values proclaim their impact, because it limits us in our larger cultural impact. But when you have a social, political, educational, cultural, or media leader who is a follower of Jesus Christ and lives by that vision and those values, my column is read by many more people than I will ever be able to reach by preaching or speaking at national TV or debating a political leader or whatever. That has audience. And last Monday in a show that they say is viewed by about 1 million people at 8 o'clock in the evening after the major evening news. That is a platform. But you don't go there just quoting the Bible. That doesn't make it. You translate conceptual and otherwise those concepts, those powerful truths, so that you speak to contemporary issues in a not only intelligent and intelligible way, but also credible way to show that there are alternative ways of thinking and action.
By the way, you are probably, I would be quite safe to say that you're a hero for some of my friends. Do you have any heroes or models, people whom you admire?
I am not a hero. Those people we discussed earlier who really suffered are the heroes. But in a debate some years back in America between Calvinists and Arminians, I was asked what I am, and I said I'm a Paulinist. What do you mean? I said
so Paul is your hero.
Paul would be my hero.
And a contemporary, like 20th century personality?
On political engagement would probably Wilberforce. On evangelism and social impact along with it would be John Wesley is definitely one of my heroes.
Is he among your favorite authors also?
Not so much. He's not as impressive as an author.
So what would be your favorite authors? So just a few, what comes to your mind when you instinctively mention?
I've learned a lot from Helmut Thielicke, a German Lutheran theologian and ethicist. Dietrich Bonhoeffer would be a hero, and it's a pity he didn't live longer and write more. You have a number of Abraham Kuyper I quoted, I think, in one session, although he would not be along our charismatic line, but a great mind and a social reformer and philosophical, theological, educational leader, and so on. When I was a student among evangelicals, the leading theologians were people like Carl Henry. I know that Josephson was translating his 5 volumes.
It's already done in Germany.
Yeah, but Carl Henry is not very influential any longer, because he was in the area. He was more of almost like evangelical rationalistic movement, with a strong influence of obviously Scottish common philosophy, as were the Princeton divines, great Warfield Hodge leaders of the early 20th century. But I think it's important that we all younger, I cannot say that to myself, but to your generation, younger leaders, that we become good stewards of our minds and do whatever we do, excellence is part of Christian stewardship, and that we address contemporary issues without departing from the followership of Christ and a high view of scriptural authority. So we've still got a long way to go, but it's an exciting time to live in. Because there are new ways of communicating and sharing ideas globally that were not there before.
Thank you very much. Although I have many other questions that I'd like to ask, I'll stop.